Hi, good morning, everyone. And as always, thanks for joining. As you can see, this is part three of our series on 911 services. And today, as you can see in the title, we'll be focusing really on advanced next generation. Perhaps a lot of you who have either attended this event or otherwise have looked into 911 in general. But again, today really focusing on that next generation of services. So Jake, if you don't mind advancing, we'll get started. So to date, if you have been or perhaps not included in these events, we really have focused on legislation and compliance. So what does it mean, particularly in healthcare? Dispatchable location, we talked about what it is and how to report on it. And today we'll really focus on those location services. And that really becomes, in my mind anyways, and Jake, I'll ask you to have input here in a little bit, but becomes really a key factor in differentiating a lot of the services available and also achieving compliance, particularly with Ray-Bombs Act. So we'll go into detail on those things. So introductions first. We'll have the pictures here in a moment. I'm Joe Paquette, Business Development Director of the Northeast. One of my jobs here is to bring information like this to our clients. Jake will have a recap of part 1 and 2. Again, we'll focus on next generation. That's me over there. Sorry, Jake. That's me over there to the left. Mark Fletcher will not be joining us today. So with that, I'll introduce Jake.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, my name's Jake Damphouse. I'm the channel manager with 911 Inform. I've been working with Joe over the past few months to bring 911 Inform to the New Era Technologies suites of products, and really looking forward to moving forward with you guys. You guys have been fantastic as a partner thus far, and really excited to show you guys what next generation 911 is capable of and some of the capabilities even just within the 911 Inform platform today.
Awesome, thanks, Jake. So as we get started, I will, for those that perhaps aren't or are new to New Era, I'll give a little bit of background. But before doing so, some housekeeping. If you do have questions, please feel free to include those in the question bar or the chat bar. If for some reason we don't get to those today, these are recorded and we will definitely follow up with you after the event. So New Era, for those that aren't familiar, as you can see, 40 plus offices worldwide, over 1,600 employees. Now I think it's up to 1,800 plus. And probably the biggest takeaway is to know that really from the initial research, education, design, sort of where we are right now, through implementation and post support, we have those technicians and engineers and installers to support you. And Jake, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, graphically, today we're sort of focused on the collaboration and security and line safety piece. But just know with our clients, we're really touching that entire life cycle of the network. So data networking, for example, for us is Microsoft services and networking and security. We have our Cloud Blue professional services, cloud managed services, and traditional managed and professional services. So if you have needs, please reach out to your New Era rep and we can go talk about those in detail. So I think, Jake, as we move forward, this will be a great jumping off point. And as always, thank you so much. I look forward to the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So really the topic of today is enabling connected buildings through the next generation 911 network. Before we really dive into that, I think it's important to understand why this is sort of the end point of an end-to-end solution. So if we just do a quick recap of the first few sessions, in case those of you who are on the webinar weren't attending the first two. We went over 911 legislation, and I'll kind of rehash that in just a moment. And then we talked about device location discovery, how understanding where these devices are located and providing a dispatchable location with those calls, which is required by that legislation. There's kind of an art to understanding and basically finding that device so that the location that is reported is accurate, and it can provide information to public safety when those devices do call 911. And then the final piece that we really touched on that we're really going to dive into today is the E911 versus NG911 data and what the capabilities are with those two separate. So if we really look at the legislation, just to kind of talk about that from how it kind of kicks everything off here. In our first session, we really dove into the entire Carey Hunt situation that happened back in 2013 that really kick-started all of these the laws that have come out. So what Carey's law requires is that there is direct access to 911. You cannot have 9 as a prefix. If 911 is dialed on one of your devices, it has to go to public safety. The other requirement for that is that there is an on-site notification. Someone within your organization, whether it be security, front desk, administration, someone that is going to understand and be aware of that emergency that is going on, so that if there is something that is happening, at least there's a notification on site so that the internal response can begin and basically become aware of that emergency. Ray-Baum's Act kind of pushes the notification a little bit further. It deals with notification and location information. If you look in the top right, where dispatchable location is defined as the street address of the caller plus any additional information needed to locate the calling party in a reasonable amount of time. Now that is, as we've talked about, it's left vague on purpose because, as Fletch, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, as Fletch always says, every building's like a snowflake. So what may work for one specific building, it may not make sense to report at another building. As we talk about the next gen environment today, I think that's really where the information that is reported and the dispatchable location information kind of rears its head around a little bit, because if we look at the E911, basically the data that is seen by the 911 call taker, it's very antiquated, it's text-based, and there's really just those 20 characters of information to determine the location of the 911 caller. With the next gen 911 network, there's capabilities far beyond that. So we have multimedia capabilities, and that's really where we're going to talk about today, is the capabilities beyond just reporting location. And while location's important, I think there's a lot of situational awareness and information that can come with that multimedia capability. So if we look on this screen on the right, we're looking at a floor plan where we obviously see the location of the 911 call, but we have a building floor plan. So if someone who's a first responder has never been to that building, they at least know, okay, this is the door. I need to go through the north door, and my best access route will be down the hall to the right. There's other information on here, such as fire extinguishers, and we'll kind of get into the importance of that as well down the line. But the capabilities are kind of endless as far as what your organization could use in the event of an emergency. So if we get into kind of what this looks like in a real environment, and the reason this kind of all comes to a head is that there's a ton of technology, and the basically infrastructure has gotten overhauled over the last decade or so, where video surveillance, door access control, AI technologies like gunshot detection, weapons detection, facial recognition. We've seen temperature sensors over the last year and a half kind of gain popularity. All of this technology is basically in place in most organizations today. You definitely see quite a few buildings that have video surveillance that's on a system. Door access control is ever growing. You have key card systems, things like that. And all the problem that kind of comes with this is they're all siloed. And I'll talk about the challenge to that in a moment. But really, with all of these technologies, and then you pair that with 911 calls, whether they be from PBX phones or cell phones. What we really try to do is take all of these as emergency triggers. Any of these things that we've connected to, we can aggregate and we can basically set off the consistent workflow so that your internal teams are notified in the same way, whether it be from a 911 call from one of your devices, or if you did have some sort of gunshot or weapons detection system in place and one of those sensors went off. All those things would basically create the same sort of alert and event, so that from emergency to emergency, there's a consistent response that can begin to grow. We try to make that easy and consumable so that when those events do happen, you can use that information to create a real response. And even as events may happen, we always hope that there's not as many emergencies, but they're kind of inevitable. So from event to event, the response can become a little bit more streamlined. And again, the challenge today is most of this technology is sort of siloed. You have a camera system, you have a door access control system. Most of these run on their own platforms, the platforms from the companies that use them. And those are typically fine in a non-emergency scenario. But when you're in an emergency scenario and you have multiple parties that are trying to respond to that event, trying to put all of that stuff into the hands of public safety, where you may have to have a separate login for the cameras, and then certain individuals may need to have key cards to get through the doors. It became a one-way data channel too, is where information was getting sent to public safety, but public safety didn't have the ability to send all of that data back to the organization. So really the goal of all of this and the real end outcome is that there's a bi-directional communication in place. All of that video surveillance, door access control, the floor plans with the information about the location, emergency triggers, all of that can then be sent to public safety. But then public safety can then respond and give some additional information that the enterprise may not have, where extra information that came across from the 911 call itself, the dispatchable resources such as law or fire or EMS, they can begin to communicate back into the enterprise and figure out if the enterprise has any information that may be useful to them. So what we really like to promote is that it's a single pane of glass. You have the cameras all in one spot, doors. There's a common chat platform where in a hospital or healthcare environment, you have your security teams coordinating with the responding public safety all in one spot. You have the ability to mark assets, and then all of that information and technology is controlled from that single pane of glass. So if we sort of dive into the platform itself and what all this technology is used and where it's kind of stored, the platform itself is a web-based platform. There's no need for application or software to be downloaded onto the devices that are going to be notified. It's easily accessible, that those notifications can come across via text message, email, and basically each event is a unique URL, which leads me into the security of it. We're tying into the technologies that you have today, cameras, doors, things of that nature. And a lot of times, enterprise doesn't want to necessarily hand over that technology to public safety 24/7. But when an emergency arises, they certainly want the public safety to have all the resources at their disposal. So sort of what we do is, during an event, that the link that is being used to notify public safety and internal teams gives the capability for those cameras and doors. But once that event is closed, that link that was sent out to notify is no longer available and none of the technology is accessible. So if we look at kind of the platform itself and the notification capabilities, for a lot of healthcare organizations that we deal with, we see a campus environment. We have multiple buildings spread out, and you often may even have multiple campuses within your organization as a whole. What we can really provide is not only a campus-wide notification, but we can basically provide this notification to someone who may not be familiar with the layout of your campus. So you have multiple buildings, and you may be able to say it's actually in the ops building, but without any landmarks or references, that may not be useful to public safety. So with a 30,000 foot view of, with a 30,000 foot view of their campus and says, okay, this is the ops building, this is where the emergency is, and these are the best ways to get to that building. From there, we can dig down and we can see, okay, within the ops building, that emergency is actually in room D. Provides that best access route, as I had mentioned earlier, and basically within the platform itself, you can provide additional views of that building through our tactical mode, where you have an east, north, south, west view of the building. So if someone needed to set up a command center and they were looking, they can understand, okay, probably the west parking lot is our best area for this response. At the bottom of all of these event notifications is that common chat platform. Really what this provides is that two-way communication, so public safety as well as your internal teams all have one spot to communicate. You can confirm information, you can provide updates, you can provide ETAs, and any additional information that maybe go along with the response can be provided through that through the chat platform. Additionally, here we have this notification type. Really what that does is we can have additional basically settings to put this platform into, and these can be customizable by your organization. So if you have common emergency types within your organization, such as a medical emergency, you can set up a lockdown, active shooter, fire response. Really what those will do is pre-program workflows. So if it's a medical emergency within the ops building, there are medically trained personnel at that building. What that can then do is with the click of a button, notify all of those personnel within that building that are medically trained of the event, where the event is, and potentially what additional information may come along with it. That kind of leads me into my next point of emergency asset marking. So basically what we could do is mark assets within your buildings, such as AEDs, fire extinguishers, chemical hazards. And when one of those emergency events, such as a medical emergency, goes into effect, what we can do is start to populate those emergency devices like an AED within the building, so that whoever's responding, even internally or externally, can understand where those devices are if they may help in their response. Live cameras. Unfortunately, we couldn't pull up a live camera feed today. You know, we'll get to the end and talk about some of those after meetings that we can set up through New Era, so that we can pull those up. But really, what the live camera feeds provide access to is, you know, if there's a specific use case, could be that if you did have a gunshot detection system in, or even a weapons detection system, and one of the weapons sensors goes off, let's say at the front door of a hospital. One of those sensors goes off, what it can automatically do is obviously the event will open up, the emergency event will open up in the platform, And then we can pop the cameras that are closest to that sensor that went off. So whoever's responding can understand, okay, this is where that weapon may be located. We can mark that on the map, and we can identify, where that potentially could be moving to within the building. Other things could be use cases for cameras. If there is a medical emergency or a fire, you could click over to that camera, understand, okay, this is where the emergency is, and then public safety could reach down, look at that camera, and try and get some additional situational information based on what they're looking through. The other thing to note is, when we've worked with, public safety, they have the ability to pull these up on their smartphones, tablets, Toughbooks, whatever they're using to coordinate their response. We've actually heard some stories where, because these are so low latency and low bandwidth, some police officers have been able to pull open 3, 4, 5 of these live camera feeds in the Toughbook in their cruisers before they've even responded to the event, just to get some better situational awareness as far as what's going on within the emergency. We get to door controls and door access. Sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Sorry about that, Jake. Yeah, just a comment there on public safety, and I don't know if you could shed light on this, but what I've seen so far in a lot of our calls with clients is almost a question of internally, great, we have access to all this information. We don't know if local authorities have that, and what we're finding, and perhaps you can add to this, is they certainly have access to it based on the systems in place, may not even know it. But when we have this tool available for our clients, all of a sudden we have both of these entities working together and utilizing all of these features within the product. Is that something you've seen? Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, absolutely, no question. What we commonly see is they may have access to some things, they may know about them. They likely don't have access to all. It's most common with education in schools, specifically K to 12, because there is much more of a relationship with those organizations and public safety than some common enterprise that we do deal with. But from this standpoint, basically handing over a lot of the technology and information only during the emergency and having it all be in one spot has been something that public safety has really taken to, and we've heard responses like, this is exactly optimal for what we would be looking for when it comes to information and access. Public safety even says, look, we're not looking for 24/7. We really just need it when there is an emergency. So be able to hand that over. And it kind of pushes into my next point, where having the ability to lock and unlock doors from a smartphone let's say an EMT, where we actually heard there was a situation at a school where it was on a weekend. There was a medical emergency within the building. EMTs showed up to the door, and they waited 8 minutes for that door to be unlocked because they didn't have access to that facility. With this, they basically could reach over, unlock, and lock the door back behind them, and then respond within a minute, as opposed to waiting for 8 minutes for someone to come and unlock that door. So as we kind of talk about public safety and the response, the tools that are available, most of this information that we've kind of gone over is applicable to both the enterprise and public safety. You can certainly think of scenarios where someone within the building could even use the cameras and the doors that internally responding to those events. But from a public safety standpoint, we've worked with SWAT teams and tactical police forces to really understand, all right, what tools would be useful to you during an emergency. So one of the things that was pretty clear is a digitized and efficient way to clear a building. So if there was a lockdown or an active shooter or something like that, clearing a building was typically a pretty monotonous job because you had to go room to room, and there was not a lot of communication. Uh, there are some organizations that still would go door to door and spray paint and basically mark off that that room was clear. With what we do, we basically digitize that process. So everyone that's involved within the event is going to know which rooms are clear, which ones aren't. So if one of those rooms had a medical emergency within it, once those rooms are deemed clear, you could begin to allow that medical treatment to begin. Oh, I did not mean to go forward. What this can do basically, obviously you have people who are going room to room clearing those rooms. They're not going to be on their phone in between rooms, marking those rooms as clear. But what they can do is basically radio back and say, hey, room C is clear, room B is clear. Once the command center has basically marked those clear, everyone that's involved with the event, whether that's public safety, fire, EMS, they'll have the knowledge that those rooms are clear. And it's basically up to the second that those notifications come across. Just keeps everyone on the loop as far as where the progress has gone. We also have this mode called Battleship Mode. Basically, what happens is that that floor plan and overhead view gets put into a grid system, and it allows public safety to mark relevant things on the map. So, worst case scenario, you have a potential pipe bomb or mysterious package. What can happen is they can mark the location of that package, and if they're potentially, depending on the size of it, they can mark how big that blast radius could potentially be. And what that will do is create the radius, as you can see in the bottom right, and it'll keep all responders away from that area, just to be sure until that area can be clean. What it can also provide is, like I mentioned earlier, where we wanted to set up a command center. That could be in the parking lot, that could be in an open field. Public safety could basically mark their responding area, and everyone who is approaching the scene can know, okay, this is where our command center is going to be located. So really, Battleship Mode just gives everyone a common talking point as far as where certain things are located within the response.
Hey, Jake, not a specific comment to Battleship Mode, but just to point out the digitized map you're showing and have been showing, just to be clear for everyone, that is part of the service that you provide for deployment, correct?
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, Joe. Yes, the floor plans are absolutely part of our service. They kind of serve multiple purposes, not only from a notification of where emergencies are located and the emergency assets they're in, but also from our previous conversation of device location and allowing those users to mark where those devices have either moved to or are currently located. So those are a very important part of our solution, and they are included within our service. So to kind of wrap up, obviously, as I had mentioned earlier, once the event's closed, there's no longer access to the technologies that are connected. It creates the security, and it creates sort of security from event to event. There are only a few designated personnel that could be the police chief or the head of the command for the response team, or a head of response for your internal teams that are allowed to close the event out at all. But once that is closed, the links that were sent out with the notification to access all of this technology and information will no longer work. They'll basically be brought to a blank screen. And unless that they are invited into another emergency with a separate URL, they will no longer have access to any of the information or technology that they previously did during the response. After an event is is finished and closed out, we basically have a good amount of reports that we can generate, whether that's a timeline of all events and actions that were taken during the emergency, whether that be someone opened a camera, someone cleared a room, opened a door. All that information is basically stored and put on a timeline so that if you had to do an after action report, you could understand what happened and when that happened. These are pretty common within education, but from a drilling standpoint, for I think any enterprise, to understand where some best practices lie, as well as some areas where a response could be effectively cleaned up. The reports have been pretty popular from that standpoint.
Jake, I don't know if this is, I'll use the word appropriate, I guess, but question, do you find or have you found or have this been used for this type of reporting in any cases for litigation? I know there's in the first couple events we talked about, there's, what we need to do, and there's also the realization of what can happen if someone provides a wrongful lawsuit type thing. Has this been ever used, or is this part of that potential process?
Sure. So I don't know of any active cases where that has been used for that purpose. I'm sure it could be, if we can basically document how an emergency played out and what the response really looked like from a second by second nature. If any of those cases were to arise, we would have a pretty good idea of what happened, and if any wrongdoing was done, it could be notified.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then finally, this is kind of an aside. Obviously, with emergencies, you want those notifications to be sent out in a way that they could be accessed and used. But also included within the platform is our mass notifications solution that is not necessarily solely used for emergencies. We've actually seen some organizations that basically just use this for closings or COVID alerts, things like that. So this is also available. We can send up to 64,000 text messages and emails per minute. And basically, you can use these as pre-saved messages, reminders, marketing campaign sorts of things if you have any of those, as well as you can use these ad hoc. So if you had a notification you wanted to send out right now, you certainly could do that. And then those pre-saved messages can be sent at the moment that you wanted to click send, or you could time those out to send them tonight, tomorrow, next week, whatever you wanted to do. So just a kind of final additional feature that doesn't necessarily apply to the emergencies solution side of it, but it's just kind of an additional thing that's built in.
Yeah, Jake, thank you. We'll talk about what this is here in a moment. We can see that it's a discovery meeting. We'll talk about the outcome, but before doing so, I'd really like to share what we have seen happen with clients. This may or may not pertain to your organization, but what I've been seeing so far is everyone knows 911 is important. They all agree upon that organizationally. But without exception so far, the level of understanding and level of priority related to budget is different between perhaps the traditional phone folks, the IT group, physical security, operational folks. So I think one of the biggest values that we've seen from these meetings is clients that get those groups together now have a common baseline to start from and have a common plan of action to move forward on. So these meetings are great. We'll sit down with your team. We'll talk about the current environment, what your challenges are specific to your current systems. We'll do demos based on your use case, live demos. At the end, if you so desire, we can create a bill of materials, which will show you from a budget standpoint what it would look like going forward. But I think most importantly, again, what we've seen is that process of getting those teams together very quickly provides everyone with a sort of a single direction to move forward on. Jake, would you agree, disagree? What have you seen from that so far?
I absolutely agree. It sort of brings all stakeholders to the table from the beginning. You don't have to catch anyone up, and nothing gets missed within the cracks if you have to relay any information or if any questions kind of get missed from meeting to meeting. It also kind of provides some insight as far as what the end-to-end process is for you today. If what happens when the 911 call or emergency is placed from the IT perspective, the security perspective, facilities perspective, all those viewpoints kind of are discussed within these calls, and it really provides I think a common place, I guess, to move forward and make sure everyone's needs are identified.
Awesome. Thank you. And folks, on the post webinar survey, there will be a box there you can check off to say, yeah, I'd like to have that discovery meeting. So it's easy enough just to check that off. As we close, first, thank you for attending. Jake, I want to really thank you as always. This series has been great. I know we've brought a lot of content to our customers. So on behalf of New Era, thank you so much for partnering with us on this important subject. As we leave, is there any closing comments you wanted to make about this?
I just wanted to say thank you again to the New Era team, and really the kind of closing thought is, view this as the end-to-end solution, right? We talked about it from really the connected buildings perspective today, but it's really the visibility and understanding of the 911 call. It actually starts at the device location, right? You have to understand where those devices are located so that the response is effective and everyone's aware of where that emergency is. And then you can move into the additional information that could potentially save some lives when it comes to medical emergencies, active shooters. There are many scenarios you could run through where locking down a building or a group of buildings with a click of a button could potentially save some lives. And notifying all of your personnel and employees what is really happening with a click of a button is also something that's really important. So from the legislation down to device discovery and location, all the way through to notifications and additional information. That's really the kind of flow that was kind of broken down for the 3 webinars, but to kind of come full circle. So that's really my final point, and I really want to thank everyone who's joined us. If you've joined for all 3, appreciate you sticking with us. Hopefully you've learned something, and hopefully we speak to you soon about your specific use case. But Joe, I want to thank you again for setting all these up. They've been fantastic, and I've really enjoyed doing them.
Great. Thank you, Jake, and all. Thank you once again for attending, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.